We are going to review comparing fractions, how to find the least common multiple of a number, as well as move into writing a fraction as a decimal. So let's go ahead and review how we can use common multiples when we're comparing fractions. You'll recall that we can't compare fractions that have different denominators because they're different, just kind of like apples and oranges are different. Here we have 1/3 and here we have 1/4, and you can see that they're not the same. So we can't compare fourths to thirds because they're not the same. So we're going to go ahead and use this example, 2/3 and 3/4. Let's compare them. Well, because I'm dealing with thirds and because I'm dealing with fourths, I have two different things. So we need to make them the same first. The way that we do that is we stack them one on top of the other, and we're going to make equivalent amounts. Equivalent, remember, means equal. So we have to find a common denominator that they both would have in common. So we do that by using a multiple of 3 and 4. You will recall that you can either list all of the multiples of 3 and 4 until you find one in common. We call that popcorning back and forth. Or you can use prime factorization trees to do that. Either way, it's fine. I also said that you can always multiply the denominators together. That will give you a multiple, but remember, when you're dealing with really large numbers, when you do that, that's where it gets a little tricky. So whatever method you want to choose will work. Do what is comfortable for you. You can see some of the other videos and look back in your book to go through those strategies, or you can reach out to me and I will answer your questions about how to do that. So once we find a number that works, in this case we could use 12. We're then saying, how do I make an equivalent fraction? Remember, whatever I do to one, either numerator or denominator, I have to do to the other. So in this case, what am I doing to the 3 to get to 12? Or what have I done to the 12 to get to the 3? So I'm either dividing the 12 by the 3 or saying 3 times what equals 12, whichever way works best for your mind. We're multiplying the 3 times the 4 to give us 12. Whatever I do to the denominator, I must do to the numerator. In other words, in order to keep it equal. Because remember, when I multiply a fraction by a number that is the same numerator and denominator, that's the same thing as multiplying the fraction by one whole. The one whole can look differently though. In this case, our one whole looks like 4/4, okay? So 3 times 4 is 12, 2 times 4 is 8. So 2/3 is equivalent to 8/12. It's the same amount. Down below here, now I'm dealing with a different fraction here, has nothing to do with the 4s up here. Now I'm saying, well, what did I do to the 4 to get to 12? In this case, I multiplied by 3. So again, I want to make sure that I'm multiplying 3/4 times a whole in order to keep it equivalent. So because I multiplied by 3 down here, I'm also going to multiply by 3. 3/3 is the same thing as one whole. 3 times 3 is 9. So now I have two fractions that are new, 8/12 and 9/12, and they are both equivalent to the original fractions that you see there. Now that I have common denominators, I'm dealing with the same thing. I'm dealing with 12ths. Well, would 8/12 be greater than or less than 9/12? In this case, 8/12 is less than 9/12. So going back to my original problem, I say, since this amount is less than this amount, which fraction does 8/12 represent? It represents 2/3. How does that read in the problem? 2/3 is blank, then 3/4. We would write less than. So I'm hoping that helps, and hopefully that will be a good review for you. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on then into writing fractions as decimals. And if you want to get your book out to help you as we go through this lesson, you certainly may do that. I'm going to teach you a little bit of a different strategy than what your book does, but I will recognize what the book has there as well. So we're going to talk about how to write fractions as decimals. You might say, oh, that sounds scary, Mrs. Greenlee. No, you're going to actually understand a little bit more than you think you will be right off the top of that. Remember that let's deal with, let's use 2/5. We'll just use that as our example, 2/5, okay? What does this fraction line actually mean? Does anybody remember what that actually means? I know you can't talk back to me, but I'm so used to asking as a class full of kids, so it's hard for me to get those habits out of my way of teaching. But when I have that fraction line there, it means divided by. So in other words, what we're saying here is 2 divided by 5. That's one way that you're able to figure this out. So we know how to do that. We learned how to do that when we were dealing with decimals. Remember that 2 divided by means that the 2 is what we are dividing. So that's going to go inside the bracket as the dividend. Divided by 5. 5 is what we are using as our divisor. So here's what our problem looks like. And we know how to do that, right? How do I go about figuring out an answer for this? Well, we know that we can't just have 2 and split it up 5 ways. So we're going to go ahead and keep on dividing. Well, what did we learn to do to allow yourself to keep on dividing? We learned that you can put a decimal point right here, pop it straight up here into our answer, and then we can add zeros because the value of 2 has not changed. This is still 2. So now I'm saying 5 goes into 2 0 times. If you want to go through the process of doing the division on that part, you may. But if you can see that you can just go 5 into 20, you can do that too. Just make sure you have your decimal point lined up. That is so, so important. So 5 goes into 20 4 times. When I multiply, I get 20. I subtract, I get 0. I still want to compare. I'm good to go, and there's nothing more to bring down. So my answer here is 4/10. So 2/5 is the same thing as 4/10. That's one way that you can do it. Another way you can do it, this is one of the ways that your book tells you, is let's make an equivalent fraction. Equivalent means equal. Well, can you think of a place value column that you could put as your denominator here that would be a multiple of 5? I know that might be a little bit of a tricky question, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying here in a second. Think of your place value columns. We know that we have thousands, hundreds, tens, ones, and then we also have on the other side of the decimal point, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, right? So can you think, we know that this is going to be less than 1 because 5/5 would be 1 whole. So if we have anything less than 5 in our numerator, that means that it's less than 1. So we're dealing with something over here in decimal world. So we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, can you think of a place value column that 5 could be a factor of, or that the column would be a multiple of? Yeah, sure. Hopefully you thought of 10. You may have even thought of another one, but we're going to use 10. So 5 goes into 10. How many times? What do you do to the 5 to get to 10? Right, you multiply by 2. Because I want to make an equivalent fraction here, I need to multiply 2/5 times 1 whole. Well, our whole in this problem is going to take the form of 2 halves. You see our whole right here is the whole? So 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 2 is 4. Say that out loud to yourself here. 4/10. If I were to say to you, I want you to write 4/10 down on your paper, some of you might write it in fraction form, but some of you might write it as a decimal. How would I write 4/10 as a decimal? Well, I would put the 4 into the tenths column. There you go. That is how you can change a fraction into a decimal. So again, just to review, you can either divide your numerator by your denominator, or if your denominator if you can think of a place column that is a multiple of your denominator, then you could also change it into an equivalent amount and go that direction. Here's another example.